This is Sports Vibes TV. I'm your host, Keys, and in this video, we're going to be looking at an article that was dropped over on SNY, and it was written by Ian Bagley. So Ian Bagley, he was having a mailbag Q&A, and Knicks fans sent him questions. He had a bunch of responses, and if you guys want to see some of the things he said in more detail, I'll put a link to it down in the description. I think there were a lot of takeaways, so whenever you guys get a chance, you can hit that link and go check out the video in its entirety. Now, there was one question that I think was extremely interesting. Well, not the question itself, but his response. I thought it was really interesting, and I decided let's make a video on it. So before I get into it, if you like the video, you know what to do. Make sure you smash that like button and also share it to anybody that you think would find some value from it. And if you're looking for Knicks content here on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and you have notifications set to all. That way you're notified whenever I drop new videos. So with that being said, let's jump right into the article and see exactly what Ian Bagley had to say. So I have the article here on screen, and Ian Bagley was asked to predict the starting lineup for next season. And you can see Ian Bagley starts by saying, a few things come to mind here. When the Knicks signed Jalen Brunson, some in the organization were concerned with the defensive pairing of Brunson and Evan Fournier in the backcourt. Now, this is a legitimate concern. This is something we talked about last year. Well, not the pairing of Brunson and Fournier, but we talked about Fournier being a liability on defense. And now you're pairing him with Jalen Brunson, who is a better player than the Kemba Walker we had last year, but you have a lot of the same issues where you have a smaller point guard where teams, even though, Jalen Brunson gives a lot of effort out there on defense, physically, there's times where effort can't overcome physical limitations. So Brunson, he's a smaller point guard. Guards can try to attack him and try to shoot over him to get good looks. And you pair him with a guy like Evan Fournier, who we saw time and time again allow teams to penetrate at the point of attack. And that could be a recipe, I won't say for disaster, but it would definitely put our backs up against the wall, and we would have to be, on point in terms of our rotations, Mitchell Robinson and Ihart defending the rim and things like that. So if you can make some changes to that starting lineup where you can kind of alleviate some of the defensive pressure from some of the other guys out there, then I think that's something that you should explore, especially when you look at the depth on this team. And, Evan Fournier, I don't want to say it's all cons. There are some positives, some pros to Evan Fournier remaining in the starting lineup. We saw what he was able to do last season as a shooter. He broke the franchise record for most three-pointers in a season. And I think you look at that and you look at this team, and we are definitely a team that needs shooting. However, when you start to compare some of the pros in his shooting to some of the cons out there defensively, at that point there might be an imbalance. So if you start to look further down the roster, you can see some other options. So Ian Beckley continues with his prediction. He says, I don't know if this was an option shared by the majority of decision makers, but it was prevalent. Before we get into it, I want to know who the decision makers are, because when it comes to the rotation and minutes, there's only one decision maker as far as I see it, and that's going to be Tom Thibodeau. So does Tom Thibodeau think there'll be an issue with a Jalen Brunson, Evan Fournier backcourt defensively? Because if not, then I think the likelihood of Jalen Brunson and Evan Fournier starting together is going to be high, because we know Thibs loves his vets, and if he doesn't think there's an issue with them out there on defense, and Evan Fournier is going to give him that shooting that you would like out there when you want to space the floor and help and make it easier for some of your guards and perimeter players to penetrate, then I think Evan Fournier has a pretty strong chance of remaining in the starting lineup. So it's very interesting to see who those decision makers are, and to see if those are the decision makers that are going to hold weight when it comes down to minutes allocations. But Ian Bagley continues. He says one scenario discussed internally around that time was starting Quentin Grimes at shooting guard and bringing Fournier off the bench. This is one alternative that Tom Thibodeau can turn to. We already know that he's extremely fond of Quentin Grimes. We know Grimes can defend. He can be a pest and bother some of the elite perimeter scorers and playmakers in the league. And I think he's not going to be a drop off, or a major drop off, if any, from Evan Fournier when it comes to the ability to knock down the three. He's got one of the most consistent jump shots on the squad, and he hustles play in and play out. So I think pairing Grimes with Jalen Brunson in the starting lineup, I think definitely alleviates some of the defensive issues that you have with Evan Fournier without losing any of the shooting, in my opinion. But me personally, when you look at Quentin Grimes being elevated to the shooting guard, that means we now entrench RJ, or we stick RJ at the three. And I don't think that's going to be ideal for RJ Barrett. I think when you're looking at that starting lineup, I'm trying to put RJ Barrett in the best position to succeed. And I think him at the two would be ideal in moving forward and trying to build around him and Jalen Brunson, because now you have Jalen Brunson, who's a smaller guard, paired up with RJ Barrett, who's a bigger guard. And, you listen to RJ talk about what he wants to do on defense, and he's buying in and he's trying to be one of those, premier defenders on the perimeter. So I think that's the route I would go. Ian Bagley continues. He says, another scenario discussed internally involved moving RJ Barrett to shooting guard and Cam Reddish to small forward. Now, to me, this is the route that I would go. You would have RJ Barrett at the two, like I mentioned before, and then you would have Cam Reddish at the three, one of the only players that has his build and is, has the ideal size and ability out there on the wing. And you have those two guys out there on the court together, continue to grow and get better. You see RJ Barrett and Cam Reddish over the weekend. They were down in Duke together, working out. And I think this should be the route that the Knicks should take when you're looking at building the best starting lineup with the players that we have available. You're going to stay young with RJ Barrett and Cam Reddish, two guys that were drafted together. So you have two core wing players that you can continue to build around, and you have a guy in Jalen Brunson who's the consummate professional, hardworking, and I think those three on the perimeter is something that opposing teams are going to have issues with, both defensively and on offense, especially if we get Cam to buy in and kind of pick it up a little bit out there. If he's showing the same level of intensity that we see from other guys like Quick and Grimes, I think he'll be a major problem with for opposing teams. So hopefully that's the route that they do go, but it doesn't seem like Tom Thibodeau is a big fan. And like I said, earlier in this video, it's all going to come down to who Tom Thibodeau feels is going to put him in the best position to win. Now, that doesn't mean who's going to be the best player for the other guys out there on the court. It's just going to be a guy that Tom Thibodeau feels puts him, in a position where he can keep his job. And, in those situations, in those instances, he usually sides with the vet. So remains to be seen. Ian Bagley continues. He says, if I had to guess, the Knicks discussed several other scenarios at the time and in the 10 plus weeks since the signing. So me personally, like I said, I'm all for Cam being elevated into the starting lineup. And I think this is the first time we're really hearing reports that the team has some sort of plan for Cam. This entire offseason, it was kind of Cam was being dangled in trade talks, etc. But I didn't hear any roadmap as to how Cam could be successful if he was still here on the Knicks. So now this is one thing that you can kind of look toward and say, all right, maybe this team is starting to try and find a way to integrate Cam Reddish onto the squad and actually give him a legitimate chance to, win the starting spot and become a difference maker on this squad. So Ian Bagley finishes, and this is his prediction. So he says, based on that knowledge and the idea that Fournier was included in several packages discussed by the Knicks and Utah Jazz and Donovan Mitchell trade talks, I'd assume that Grimes starts and Fournier comes off the bench. So in the article, Ian Bagley, he gives us his full starting lineup. It would be Brunson, Grimes, RJ Barrett, Julius Randle, and then Mitchell Robinson. Me personally, I'd go Jalen Brunson, RJ Barrett, Cam Reddish, Julius Randle, and Mitchell Robinson. So you guys let me know what your thoughts on the starting lineup would be. Who would you have starting? Would you have the same combination that I would have? Would you go with Ian Bagley's starting lineup, or would you go with the Tom Thibodeau special, which would be, Jalen Brunson, Evan Fournier, RJ Barrett, Julius Randle, and Mitchell Robinson? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Once again, I'm Keith, host of Sports Vibes TV, and I'm out.